Ready.
All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Alex Nicole Garza. If you are just tuning in, you are watching the Creativepreneur Show, and I'm so excited to have you watch today's amazing interview. I'm like already projecting that forward, but I do know because I'm very excited about our guest. So in grand tradition, how I always do this, I like to make grand introductions. And so today's guest, his name is Jake Gallen. He is born and raised here in Viva Las Vegas, where my husband and I are also located. He is a member and a founder and a creator of many projects, organizations, and businesses. And this is what caught my attention because I was like, oh yeah, he's definitely a creativepreneur. And so upon graduating from Chaparral High School, he played football. You were also running track for 4 years. Jake also attended UNLV, which is the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, where he graduated with a bachelor's in
Kinesiology.
Yes, I knew you were going to have to help me. I was practicing so hard. Sciences. And during his collegiate career, Jake was a member of Alpha Epsilon Pi fraternity and was a member of the executive board for 3 years and held vice president, treasurer, and rush chair positions. Once college was completed, Jake dove headfirst into the real world and founded Next Gen Pickers, antique and collectible store in spring 2017 and operated until the end of 2018. And then during the summer of 2017, Jake was a co-founding member of the Chameleon Verify Network, which was a ticket verification app that assisted in eliminating ticket fraud and operated until March of 2020. Now, outside of the startup realm, Jake has ventured down the path of other interests, including the Forex and crypto markets, writing his first book, creating entrepreneur and leadership groups. In his Vegas tradition fashion, I like that, Jake. He held 2 jobs at the Las Vegas Strip for the past decade. His first job, he held various positions over 5 years at Planet Hollywood Pool. In his most recent 5 years, he opened up the world-famous Omnia nightclub as a model beverage runner. And then in April 2020, he found himself in a do-or-die situation like a lot of us during this pandemic. And he created something new, the Guest List Podcast, which is a long-form conversational podcast that features industry leaders and innovative individuals across here in the Las Vegas Valley. And in short 5 months, my friends, that show has received over 5,000 downloads and 3,000 views on YouTube. Let's give a giant grand introduction and welcome to Jake Gallen.
Well, thank you, Alex. That was an amazing intro. I'm honored to be here. This is a perfect fit.
No, exactly. I'm like, you have such diverse backgrounds, and that's what I love about creative minds. It's like once you do something, if you find an opportunity here, you go there. And I just think that it shows your creativity, but also your work ethic. That was what I was going to say. One thing, Jake, is that with that kind of background, work ethic is not a problem. You're like, let's just do it and let's figure it out. So that is refreshing to see and to hear. So today I know we're going to be talking about a really awesome topic, and it's skill stacking and specific knowledge, discovering your niche. And I think this is so important to the branding and then finding out where that is and then moving that into monetization, kind of finding where your groove is. So let's just dive into that. If you want to just tell me a little bit about niche building or what you were thinking about when we were talking about what you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So discovering your niche is something that's tough for everyone. There's no specific way. If you go out simply just on Google and like, how do you discover your niche? Everyone has their own methods, and then it's cliche, like, oh, open up your mind, find something that's very specific to you. But it's really much more than that. And those terms that we'd use, skill stacking, that's used by one of my favorite philosophers, Scott Adams, which is basically along your life plan and the things that you've done, your experiences, you pull the silver linings out of all those quote unquote failures or maybe successes. And you kind of stack those along the way to build a niche that's so refined to you that nobody else can copy it. And then specified knowledge or specific knowledge is also a quote by Naval Ravikant, who's like a famous Silicon Valley entrepreneur, founder. And it's on the same lines of skill stacking, but more so it's the knowledge that's acquired rather than the actual skill that's kind of stacked on top of it. So if you can do both of these and apply them in some sort of fashion, then you'll be able to find your niche, which is also a little bit different than your purpose, because purpose is, that's everyone's grand question, right? Like,
Right.
what is my purpose?
Right.
But it's really tough to know what your purpose is when the world's changing. And something that entrepreneurs do is like, we like to solve problems. We like to help people. And so our purpose isn't something specific as like, my purpose is to paint these nice paintings, or my purpose is to build $1 million business. You know, that's a byproduct of having these specified knowledge and skill stacks along the way. So if you can apply all of these, then it's easier to know your niche rather than your purpose, which is a little bit more broad.
No, I like that, because sometimes in our discovering our skills, we find our purpose, right? Mm-hmm. And then we realize maybe our purpose is not always necessarily also attached to what we do. So sometimes we can be really good at having a particular skill, but we find our purpose, that skill might bring the revenue that allows us to fulfill our purpose. Maybe it's helping community. Maybe it's, working with children, and having these skills will allow you to now do what your purpose is.
Yes, 100%. That's something that I had realized at a young age, is that eventually, if you want to find success, there are some lucky people who do hit the jackpot and find success with their first business model. Mm-hmm. But for most of us, that's not the case.
Right.
So that's what you had said in the intro, is that I dove headfirst into Next Gen Pickers. It was an antique store. It wasn't my skill, but it was actually my father's skill. He was like a storage hunter. And so I used his skills and then went headfirst into business, discovered how to run a business. And then later that summer, I ended up going down the ticket verification app, and I already knew moderately how to run a business. So I used that knowledge with one of my co-founders who was a tech coder, and we combined our skills and we kind of stacked them together. And I applied my specific knowledge, he applied his. And unfortunately, neither of those companies ended up panning out, as so to speak, in a monetary value. But those two things built together is something that I couldn't put a price on, because the networks that were stemmed from it and the skills helped me start the podcast. And it kind of opened my eyes to it's okay to be vulnerable and go out of your comfort zone and step into, no man's land, so to speak, or these like dark voids that seem so scary. Because
going beyond your comfort zone, right? Like
mm-hmm.
a lot of people make decisions based on their comfort zone, and we've all been there. But moving beyond that is really is where you absolutely grow. So no, I absolutely get it. So I know one of the things that we've talked about in the past, getting to know each other a little bit, is that startup culture. And let's use startup in the sense of offline and online, right? Because because we've had to make that shift because of the COVID-19. We're not able to necessarily gather, or it's just different now. And I'm sure you could attest to that. But what about being around other creative entrepreneurs and that startup culture energizes you?
Oh man, there's so much. I just got a little bit of chills just talking about that. That's something I've been trying to do, is I always put a bunch of leadership qualities of different people together, because the thing with startup culture and entrepreneurs is we all have the end goal is very similar, but the path that we get there is very different, very, very different. Mm-hmm. So I like being able to mesh all of people's life stories together, because a lot of people and entrepreneurs and businessmen or businesswomen, they have a lot of hard complexities throughout their life. And they use that and they leverage that as a skill to stack and be able to apply that to whatever business model, passion project they have going forward. So I think it's the energy that comes with it more so than anything else, because everyone's very, very motivated. Everyone's at the beginning of their life, or they're just starting over, and they're energized because they kind of want to get back what they had lost in the previous model, and they are very accepting of failure. So I think I think the acceptance of failure and being able to pull out silver linings from those past experiences is one of my favorite aspects of startup culture.
That's cool because it's like, oh, that didn't work. Okay, well, what didn't work about it? Right? It's kind of like, what didn't work so that we don't make that same mistake? And I think that's really like the purpose of even this conversation, right? We're all, we're kind of talking about skill stacking and developing that within branding and monetizing, but it really goes into like everything in your whole life, whether it be relationships, whether it be just, that's my first thought about, thing. You figure that out. So awesome. So I want to dive into what you're doing now, because I know you've had a lot of cool like backgrounds. You did like amazing stuff. I'm here in Vegas and working in apps, which is technology, and then you work in the nightclub world. And so I want to talk about like right now, there is a buzzword, and everyone has been talking about podcasting. And so a lot of people know what a podcast is. I'm going to say that most people know what a podcast is. But not I had this conversation with a friend another day, and I was like, well, podcast is like, it's not always audio, because you also broadcast your visual element on YouTube. So can you just, and for those of you who may not know what a podcast is, can you just give us really basic, and then how you can get involved in that and why it's so powerful medium right now?
Of course. So basically a podcast is almost like your own radio show. That's how I say it in simple terms. You're provided your own, what's called an RSS feed, which is like some sort of syndication, radio syndication network or something like that.
I see that little.
So so you basically go on air. Well, now it's digital air, and you craft your own show. There's no production behind it besides you. There's no censorship. You can cuss, which is what everyone always asks. It's the funniest thing because, it's been so mundane in the traditional media. And now people are finding different ways to leverage podcasts, because radio shows throughout history have been mostly talk shows. But now the stats show that people are gravitating to podcasts to learn something, to learn something new through, like, my show's long form conversation. So it's similar to like popular shows like Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and some of these other ones. But other people are going educational route. Like Dan Carlin does like a 4-hour history podcast. The number one podcast area is actually religion and spirituality. So people are finding different ways to leverage podcasts, and it's a growing medium. It's about half of the US country listens to podcasts, but when those people do listen to podcasts, it says they rotate between 6 to 10 shows on average.
Wow.
So it's like a new paradigm, and it's a brand new platform. Well, the first podcast was created in 2004, but still really in its infancy. So it's a new paradigm and a new platform for people to speak their mind. And it's the complete opposite of what we see with the traditional now 15 to 30 second soundbite or video clips that you see on social media. And it's been stigmatized over and over again by traditional media, like you see on Fox, CNN, and NBC, where they take a lot of people's quotes out of context. So if you have your own show, no one can take you out of context.
Right. So it allows you to have that freedom of expression and to discuss those things that normally could get censored in other formats. So so I'm going to ask you a question. Were you always like excited about talking to people on podcasts? Like some people are like, oh my gosh, I never do podcasts. I don't like talking to people, or they're shy. Did you ever feel like that? Like, did you break through some personal barriers to like get on the microphone and like the whole technology? Because a lot of people like the idea of podcasting, but then they're like, I have no idea about tech. Do I edit? Where do I get a microphone? Like, where do I put it?
Yeah, there is a little bit of a learning curve. 5 months ago when I started this podcast, the only thing I was an audience member. I didn't know really anything about AV, but I learned everything on YouTube along the way. Everything is out there, believe it or not. YouTube University, the number 2 Google, search engine across the web. But
I've been YouTube University.
I've always been a pretty social person my entire life. So I think it was like a perfect match made in heaven, so to speak. grew up an only child. I've always been a part of different organizations larger than myself, football, track. In college, I was in a fraternity, so I was able to like create new relationships, and then into the startup world, creating new relationships again, and the different communities. And on the Strip, it's literally inherently social. It's all built
Right.
on trust. So being a fan for 2 years, I sat on the Guestless podcast idea for 2 years. And after 2 years, I was like, wow, nobody has started a talk show in Vegas, like a go-to talk show, long form. People are craving authentic conversation, just like we're having right here.
Right.
Something that can't be taken out of context and something that people can learn about and discover. So I call it the discovery platform because it's the people of Vegas who actually make the city and not the Strip. All of the shows before me, for the most part, they all talk about the events that are happening on the Strip. And time and time again, there's only so many variations of one story I could get. But working in a nightclub, people come to the nightclub the first time for the venue, but all the returning tables that we get is because they like the busser or they like the server or they like the manager. So it's really the people who are continually getting all these customers to come back because of the relationships. So I think all of those people in Vegas deserve just a platform to speak on, to share their mind, and off the Strip as well, because before the pandemic, Vegas was attempting to build itself off of tourism. Unfortunately, now we see like how devastating that's been, and it's going to take a few years to kind of build that momentum back up. But there are a lot of emerging industries out here. And so I've intended to talk to a lot of startup founders. For the most part, I'd say probably 70% of my 45 episodes that have been released have been founders of some sort of business, activist movement. I had like Clark County commissioner on the show. So we've even tapped into government officials, nurses. And there's so much exponential growth that can happen out here in Vegas. And it's such a melting pot too. So it's cool to see that highlighted through 1 hour to 2 hour conversations.
Yeah, and it's also good for those people who don't live here. They sometimes have perceptions like, do you live in a casino?
Yes.
I don't know if you've ever been asked that question.
Yes.
And you're just kind of like, really, like there's neighborhoods and schools and like churches and like parks, like normal. But you know, we, as from a branding perspective, because I understand what the city does for their branding, you know, Vegas is very much like this mystery land, and it's like, you know, there's not life beyond the Strip. But I would agree with you on that. There's, you know, one thing about Vegas in particular, and even people, this isn't a commercial for Vegas, people watching, but one thing about, we're a very unique city in the sense of that, you know, we do have amazing people, and we have a very generous community. And I think that in my, you know, experience of being here for many years, sometimes people don't realize so much philanthropy that goes on here to help the community and help others, not just locally, but like across the world. And I think sometimes we forget to highlight those. So I have caught your podcast, and I did see some of the interviews where you talk to people who are out there dealing with issues like homelessness, like every city has. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is like the power, like that shows like we're not just, you know, feathers and bright lights, and that's part of it, that's part of the glamour, but we're also about really addressing the problems that are so prevalent really across any city, right? And so it goes back again to like purpose, right? Like what is that purpose? And we might have all these things over here, but this is really the purpose and the people behind it. So no, I think what you're doing is great. And I think that I really want with people watching right now, I particularly find this interesting is because I want people to start thinking like out of the box, like even in their branding, like what they can create. And maybe it's a podcast, maybe it's a YouTube channel, and maybe it's the merging of both now with technology. So I'm going to ask you two more questions. And my first question is, what has been the most difficult part of the podcasting? What has been the most difficult challenge for you in the podcasting, and how have you overcome that?
Ooh, you go back to episode 0, the first episode that I put out. And I basically said, like, you have to open up and be vulnerable. You have to know that you don't have the skills necessary to be a pro in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But you just have to kind of put your head down and just push through it and not worry about what other people have to say, because you just have to be able to hone your craft. So that was something kind of difficult to overcome in the beginning, because let's be honest, once you put out your first episode, you're like, why is there not 10,000 downloads, even though you haven't really marketed
Your
it?
expectation, right? No, that's
Yeah.
me too. Like, oh my gosh, where's everybody listening? They're not coming. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the mental barriers that we put up is very difficult, but being, going through the startup phase multiple times, I've been through those trials, and you understand that anything that's successful or is going to be long standing is going to take some years to build, and takes a while to build a community. So it's more so the mental barriers, because people have been very receptive of the show. I'd say like 75% of the people I reach out to willingly say yes. There are some people who seem to be territorial a little bit, but they all come around in the end. And I get a ton of feedback of people comparing it to like a Joe Rogan Vegas, and to even be like a lot like compared in those lines to somebody that I look up to is, it's amazing to see, and to see that people are starting to unravel it and see that this is something that Vegas has been missing for all these times, for all these years.
No, that's interesting. And you know what? I want to tie this back into branding, because it's really important, I think, to understand, like, when you develop that niche, and then how you're building out your brand, even with your podcast, kind of that where people can kind of identify you. I hate to use the word fit in, because that's not really the right word, but where they can kind of see where you kind of fit in that world, like having a brand that kind of stands out. And so you're from a outside perspective, looking in and kind of seeing how you're establishing your brand, how you're establishing your credibility in the community, so that people, those three things that we always hear, like, know, and trust. And as you build that, then that's like your personal brand, and you're bringing that to the forefront through a podcast and getting to know people. So that's how you're carving your niche, you're carving your brand, and now eventually, I know that in the startup phase of podcasting, people want to know, like, do you make money right in the beginning? Do you make money right in the beginning? Okay, good. Yeah. So I want people to know that, like, you're probably not going to make money right in the beginning, but I know from dealing with other people in podcasts that consistency is the key. Would you agree with that?
Yep. That's literally the number one thing that the majority of podcasters that I've reached out to have recommended. They said it's consistency. The average podcast actually only lasts 7 episodes, which was mind blowing to me. Now we're at 45, and I haven't even felt any urge to slow down, even if the numbers weren't there. Yeah. But with podcasting, you don't make money right off the bat, but there are opportunities that present itself, because at the end of the day, you're just networking, you're making relationships.
Right. And just another form of that.
It's another form of networking. And we all know in this world that a lot of times it's who you know rather than what you know, especially in Vegas. So it's just another thing to offer, to be able to meet these quote unquote high network individuals or high net worth individuals.
Yeah. No, I have another friend who also says, it's not just who you know, it's also who knows you.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the world of like social media, and completely. So, all right. Well, Jake, you have been really awesome. I just want to say thank you so much for your time and just sharing from your heart, your genuineness. I can't talk today. Your genuineness. Is that even a word?
We're making it a word today. We're making it a word.
Yeah, I make up words all the time. Your authenticity, which is an overused word, but it's a true word. And being vulnerable with us, I really, really appreciate it. Now, I wanted people to find out how they can find you, how they connect with you, and how they can listen to your podcast. And then you're also being generous by giving us a free gift around podcasting. So I'd love for a niche building, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that.
Well, thank you. So there's many ways to find me. The podcast itself is listed on all streaming platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Check out the YouTube channel if you like watching podcasts. I've kind of gone down that road now. I'm a very big fan of visual podcasts. If you want to find me on social media, Jake Gallen on everything, or if you want to follow the account page at the Guest List Pod. Or you could go to my running website, which also has the gift that I'm about to mention. It's actually by a guy who I had on my podcast. It's called solo.to/the guest list pod. It's like a landing page, kind of like a link in bio,
Yeah.
but much better. And you can hear that on the show as well. And the gift on there, it's something that I've created, and it goes along lines of this conversation. It's called the not so simple way to discovering your niche. And as we talked, and kind of as you've seen the flow throughout this conversation, to find your purpose, you first have to understand specialized knowledge and the skills that you stack along the way. And then your purpose unfolds later. And some people get it twisted back and forth. So this guide kind of helps you along that way, proposes probably a few too many questions, but that's the point, is to get you thinking.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your generosity. So much appreciated. And I just wish you the best in all of your endeavors. And thank you for that. I think so many people are going to definitely take advantage of that, just trying to figure out their niche and then lead into their purpose. So Jake, thank you so much and have a wonderful day. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Alec. This was amazing and an honor.
Take care. God bless. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.